Hello and welcome to the first week for the 2016 Season 4 series of the Blancpain GT3 series on iRacing and our video tutorial for virtualracingschool.com. We are at the Nurburgring again this season, but this time we're racing at the Grand Prix layout and specifically the BES and WEC layout of the circuit. So much like the full Nordschleife layout, the GP circuit, which was introduced in the early 80s as a safer layout for Formula 1, shares much of the same aggressive high curbing and heavily banked tarmac that kind of defines the Nordschleife. The track is, however, much more forgiving to mistakes, with plenty of runoff everywhere and barriers much further from the racing surface. It is a circuit I very much enjoy, with a variety of slow technical sections and high speed corners. So I've chosen to do this week's video with the Audi, a car which initially felt faster than the BMW but later turned out to be a very even match. The balance of the Audi around here though makes it an enjoyable experience, but also more of a challenge on the limit. So for the setup, I've basically taken my Nordschleife version from last season for VRS.com, and I've added some rear ride heights to add rake and reduce the mid-corner understeer. I've also gone up one click on the pressures, just because the hot pressures were a little bit too low after some running. So as normal, I'll play the lap through on its own before then reviewing afterwards. So if we obviously select cockpit view, okay, coming out the last corner. And across the line there, that completes a lap of 1 minute 53.942, but there are definitely a couple more tenths in it, at least with this setup. So yeah, if we rewind back to the start of the lap, so obviously this is on qualifying fuel, default weather, afternoon weather to match what is going to be used this week. Yeah, so for reference to this lap, you want to be running with default weather. Now, obviously, out of the last corner, you want good traction, you want a good exit for a decent qualifying run across the start-finish line to start your lap. Then you're thinking, obviously, about the braking point for turn 1, the hairpin, which is I pretty much use the so as you approach there's the pit exit line, and it's where the pit exit line kind of straightens out to the right. Now if we just have a look at that, I pretty much brake there, and then notice how I'm approaching this corner not at the far edge of the surface as well. So, and that's obviously because I don't want to turn this. I don't want to turn and then immediately start braking. So by taking like a diagonal line to the outside of the hairpin at the bottom here, essentially, I am turning just a slight amount. You can't avoid it really. And also I'm giving myself a bigger run into the hairpin as well. But so essentially I want to keep my braking as straight as possible, and this allows me to do that. So yeah, pretty much as this pit exit curve kind of straightens out, so that's about 125 meters if you want to use the brake markers. Yeah, so you're hard on the brakes. As I said, you are turning in ever so slightly just so you don't run out of track, and as the braking continues I'll edge closer to the outside of the hairpin, but then just towards the end of the braking zone, as I start to just bleed off the brakes a tiny bit as the downforce starts to come off. So my peak braking there was about 60%, which is pretty much optimal. With the Audi, it doesn't require much input on the brakes before the ABS starts to intervene. Anyway, maybe 65-70%. But anyway, so bleeding off the brakes now as I'm turning in, and now the circuit kind of falls away at the apex, really drops away from underneath you. So you can take a tighter line, which would require an earlier turn in, but I find that the kind of benefits of that are minimal. Although I would say generally I do approach this trying to take as tight an apex as I can, because the way the circuit kind of falls away, it kind of always pushes you out and you lose grip at the apex. So but what I'm basically getting to is you get a slightly smoother run through the apex. There isn't quite such an abrupt change in elevation when you just are slightly wider. So this was pretty good. That was about right for me. If we take it through, just being patient on the throttle and immediately moving the car quickly over to the right hand side of the circuit for the next corner, which would be turn 2, obviously. Just making sure. Yeah, so I had quite a... Oh, there's something wrong with my headphones already. So I had quite a good exit out of here. So yeah, look at that, quite progressive on the throttle, as a result of being heavily traction limited at this speed. It's also obviously a first gear corner. Now again, I maintain that brake pressure right up until the last moment where I get back on the throttle, and yeah, so as I exit this first corner, obviously I'm bringing the car over to the right hand side as quickly as possible. Now I don't make it all the way over to the rightmost part of the circuit. I mean, that's kind of depending on how fast you apex turn 1. If you apex turn 1 a bit too quickly, it could be, I'd probably end up a bit further over to the left, so I'd have to sacrifice some exit speed in that case. If you exit a little bit slower, you can afford to have a wider entry, and try and make up some of that time into turn 2. So this whole sequence that now follows is very much an exercise in patience. Now if we play it through here, see how patient I am there off the throttle. So not really much in the way of trail braking this time, just a slight bit of trail braking there, but the car's kind of set up nicely for the apex, and then I'm kind of just waiting because it's quite a long corner, and it requires a bit of patience. And again, I'm traction limited on the exit as well, so it takes me a while there to my initial throttle application is quite firm, but then I'm very hesitant to get to full throttle because I'm traction limited, especially as, again, so the circuit starts to fall away down this little hill down here. So and also you want to be quite conscious of putting a wheel onto this AstroTurf on the exit. You don't want to do that, it's very slippery. So this was about as wide as I'd want to be. And then so into this tight turn 4 and 5 sequence, you don't really have a reference for your braking point into 3, so it's pretty much just a matter of judgment, really. I mean, looking at the apex and just with a bit of practice, you'll get comfortable with where to apply the brakes. I mean, there's a change of tarmac there, but it's way too late. So really, before this outer edge starts turning in, you want to already be quite heavy on the brakes. Yeah, so it's not really a good reference there. But you are turning at the same time as braking, so I'm not braking overly aggressively at this point. That's probably 45% there. And then just trail braking ever so slightly, not turning in until the car's slowed down enough. That's quite important. It's very easy to turn into this one with too much speed, and that'll induce oversteer and really kill your momentum through the sequence. And this is very much about line and momentum. So yeah, you want to hook up quite nicely onto this curb on the left. It's very easy to run here too wide and too deep, and then not only does that ruin this corner, it also kills your speed through the right-hander and then your exit down the straight. So obviously that's to be avoided. So yeah, that's quite nice and tight through there. Very patient with the throttle. Very, very briefly there I get to full throttle, and then swinging the car back over to the right. Now it is important to try and get the car over to the right onto this curb if you can, and then that just gives you a better line through to the exit, a nice tight line for a good clean exit. Just be aware, obviously, though, that it does upset the balance of the car, and you can get an incident if you use too much of the curb. So notice I'm on the curb now. I'm at half throttle, just hesitating, waiting for the car to land and settle before getting hard and full throttle. So now this is another area where you can get an incident. So obviously you want to use as much track as you can afford to. So here I've run the car as far over to the left as I can afford to get away with, using all of the track, which just basically allows me to get on to full throttle a bit sooner for as good an exit as I can get. And then it's just a matter of keeping the steering nice and open, again over that curb on the left there, pretty much as far over to the left as I can afford to be. So that was nice. So as we run down to turn 6 now you do have a reference here. You got those cones on the right. You've also got where the alternative layout goes to the right here. So pretty much at this last white line is where I hit the brakes, or just before there. So yeah, so that's just before there basically, and yeah, so a heavily cambered corner, so it's surprising how much speed you can carry through there, but it's really important here to not run too wide and too deep. So you can basically, you want to sacrifice some exit speed, so you carry a nice amount of speed in, but make sure that you keep the car nice and tight and trail brake if necessary. It's very difficult to see that, but I am just breathing on the brake pedal, so it's kind of a habit. My foot is there ready to trail brake if necessary, if I feel the car's just going to run a bit too deep. So yeah, the car runs no wider than the middle of the track. I'm within the middle of the track at this point, which obviously allows me to get a nice wide entry into 7, which again is cambered, but it can be quite funny. It's very, very difficult to hook up with the apex, at least I find. It kind of entices you into braking a little bit too late. So yeah, that was pretty good. One thing about the corner though is if you do hook up with the middle and get a nice apex, it allows you to get on the throttle really nicely and early, and you've got that wide curb on the exit. So if we just see here, we've got a nice wide entry. We're trail braking at this point. You need to trail brake quite heavily through here, because even though it's banked, the car just understeers. So that was quite nice and close to this curb. You don't want to run over the curb, because that will throw you off wide and lose you grip, and then you won't be able to commit to the throttle as nicely and early as I have done. So now I'm on the throttle nice and hard, and I'm just letting the car, opening the steering up, letting the car use all of this curb on the exit. Obviously you don't want to overdo it, you want to avoid the gravel, but that's pretty close there. And then the run down to the Dunlop hairpin, you want to obviously keep the car following this left hand side of the track, and you've got another reference there. So you've got this sort of grey dark tarmac. I think it might be concrete actually. Let's just have a look. Yeah, so that's concrete. This concrete curb, pretty much just after that starts, you want to be hard on the brakes. Now this is one of the hardest braking zones on the circuit, and it's got a very interesting approach. So basically it's such a long hairpin that you almost treat it like a double apex, and also it's heavily banked in the middle of the corner, so you can afford to carry a lot of speed in, and you have quite a lot of grip on the apex. So I find the best way to treat it is to sort of brake aiming for a nice early apex. So you'll see my line under braking here is kind of very direct to the middle of the inside of the corner, and then so I've hooked up with my first apex, and now I'm just letting the car continue to run just a little bit wide, continuing to trail brake though. That's very important. So I'm continuing to slow the car down. So even though I've had my first apex, that wasn't my minimum speed. My minimum speed is here, basically, when I'm forced out a bit wide, and then to get a great exit with that reduced minimum speed, you want to cut back to a second apex, and then that will allow you to get nice and aggressively on the power, which I've managed to do there. So I was actually just a little bit too deep there. So if we just watch this, just a bit too deep at this point, so I struggled to make it back for the second apex, but the car stuck quite well, and I was able to commit to full throttle relatively early. Again, it's perfectly okay to use this exit curb over here to basically open the car up to allow yourself to carry maximum speed up to the Schumacher S. Now the Schumacher S, which is definitely one of the best parts on the whole circuit, I'm not entirely sure about how confident you might be on using this curb on the outside here, because it's quite a high curb. It's a steep curb, like they all are really. It opens up your entry through the S, but it can unsettle the car as you come off the curb, which did catch me out in practice with some pretty leery moments. So if we just play that, so I've chosen this time to just kind of just pretty much run along it, so I'm not fully up on it as I'm turning in, and then so I already turn in before I come off the throttle, so I'm turning in slightly already, but then I'm just off the throttle now, just kind of playing with the brake. So you don't really have to brake much at all, really. It's just a slight touch of brake pressure there. I was looking for the right word, couldn't find it. So it's just really just a bit of trail braking, just to bring the car nice and tight where you want it to be in the middle of this corner here. So because what you don't want to do is turn in too late, run through here too wide, and then run out of circuit on the exit, which will then kill your entry into the right-hander. You'll pinch the right-hander too much. Likewise, you don't want to turn in too soon. If you turn in too soon, you'll get up on this curb on the inside, which will have the same effect. It will push the front wide, unsettle the front of the car. You'll be pushed wide, and you'll be in the similar position where you're running out of track here. So for the exit, or the second apex in the S's here, we've got lots of curb on the inside, which you can afford to use. So I keep the car at full throttle at this point because I've got a nice line, and bringing the car up over onto this curb fully to basically make the turning radius as wide through this whole section as I can possibly get it. Obviously, when you do use so much curb, you need to be quite cautious with the steering input, so kind of keeping the car fairly straight and allowing the car to use all of the track on the exit as well. So yeah, just keeping your steering nice and open and gradually bringing the car over to the right for, what is this, turn 11. So you've got more references here, just play it through. So you've got the brake markers on the right there. Just before the 100 meters is where I brake for this one. It's about 120, I would say. So fairly hard on the brakes, but it's quite a short braking zone because it's still quite a fast corner. And you've got this curb on the inside, which I aim to try and use generally. The corner's also cambered slightly as well, but still it can be too easy to just carry a bit too much speed into here and just run a little bit too wide on the exit. You don't want to run too wide because you immediately want to be focusing on bringing the car right over to the left of the circuit for the all-important exit towards the final chicane. So we just have a look at that again. So I'm not at full throttle at this point because I've got the car a little bit wide. I can get away with this, it's okay, but I can't afford to be at full throttle at this point, otherwise it's going to induce some oversteer on the exit here. So I did actually get just a touch of oversteer. There's a little bit of counter steering there. If we just take that through, a little bit of oversteer there, but got away with it, and still really aiming very early on as you exit that corner, aiming for the widest point, for a nice wide entry into this corner here, the right-hander. So and this corner kind of drops away, so you kind of need to trail brake quite aggressively as you approach this apex. Now it's all about entering, like I've said, as wide as possible to give yourself the optimal exit speed, because it's all about the exit speed this corner. So that's pretty close to the edge of the track on the entry. Just trail braking a very small amount there just to bring the car in tight, kind of playing with the throttle and the brakes so that I'm at the optimal point here. Now I was a little bit too tentative on the exit. It seems, I mean, we're only talking small margins here, but I was kind of playing with the throttle there on the exit, so I kind of came out a bit one too many times there. So we can see here, probably should have committed to full throttle, instead of lifting out at that second time. So there I should have committed instead of lifting again. But that, that's perfectly fine. It's better to be safe than sorry. It just meant that I lost a tiny bit of time on the exits, but obviously I'm still up here on the exit curb to reduce the scrubbing of any speed that I might have on the exit of corner as much as possible. So then through the straight, obviously keeping your steering to a minimum, but hooking up with that inside kink, gradually bringing the car over to the right hand side for the braking zone for the chicane. It's a very fast chicane, much faster than the layout that the F1 cars use. So and the braking zone is pretty much whatever you wish. I actually use this this patch on the tarmac because it allows me to look at the apex, which is more optimal for your entry. But I guess it's going to be about 60 meters that you brake. And now it's quite an early turn in because obviously it's like I said, a fast chicane. So turning in quite early at this point. Now I was just a little bit wide to where I could have been really there. You can afford to have your left side wheels up onto this second curbing, but if you go any more than that you will get an instant penalty. So just a little bit wide for me there, which pinched the exit, where I was also a little bit too tight. So I gave away a bit of time, and that's also pinched the exit, like I've said. So I've now forced myself to run up onto this curb on the left hand side, which is okay if you can get away with it. So what it obviously just means though is I've got a little bit of oversteer just there to contend with, but it's okay. The more important thing is if you do get up onto that curb, is to brake off the curb. So don't start braking before you come off the curb. So you'll notice at this point I'm steering to the right, trying to bring the car over to the track surface, the flat track surface again before I get hard on the brakes. I say hard on the brakes, not too hard, barely 50% there, because it's a very short braking zone, and you want to start turning in surprisingly early, just because it's hard to make the apex otherwise. And I always kind of aim to get as close to this this pit barrier as possible. Obviously you don't want to make contact with it, but this was nice and tight, which was good, and that just allowed me to pick up the throttle quite nicely and get good traction on the exit. So just letting the car run out wide, opening it up. You can let the car go onto this AstroTurf, but you lose a bit of traction and you risk getting an incident. So obviously best not to do that. But for me, yeah, this final corner was really nice, which made up for some of the time I lost on the exit of the chicane, which meant that I obviously had a nice good run across towards the start-finish line. And that completes our analysis with the Audi R8 GT3 at the Nurburgring GP circuit. You can find qualifying and race setups, telemetry and replays over at virtualracingschool.com, where you can also book one-to-one tuition with myself and other top drivers from the likes of Coanda Sim Sport. As ever, good luck this week and thanks for watching.